Snow drifted down on the small French village of Hopeswear. The world was burning, but here, silence pressed heavy, broken only by gunfire and the distant scream of engines. A lone figure stood on the smoking wreck of a tank destroyer, firing a .50 caliber machine gun until the barrel glowed red. Flames curled around his boots. Shells burst around him like thunder. He didn't move. His name was Audie Murphy, a boy from Texas who wasn't supposed to be here. 17 when he lied his way into the Army. Barely 5'5", a farm kid who once hunted rabbits to feed his brothers. Now he was holding off an entire German company. Alone, his own men had fallen back. The snow beneath him was soaked red. His radio crackled with artillery calls as he screamed coordinates through the smoke. For over an hour, he fought until the battlefield went silent. When it was over, 200 enemy soldiers lay scattered across the fields. Murphy climbed down from the wreck, face blackened, eyes hollow. When a medic ran to him, he said quietly, "I'm fine." That day made him the most decorated soldier in American history. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and every ribbon courage could earn. But victory has a cruel echo, because when Audie Murphy came home, the crowds were gone. Hollywood wanted his smile, not his nightmares. His brothers in arms avoided him. America, busy celebrating peace, forgot what it had cost him. This is the story of the boy who became a legend, and the legend who became invisible, a hero who conquered every enemy, except the one waiting inside himself. Texas, 1942. The sun beat down on dust and desperation. In the town of Farmersville, a scrawny 17-year-old stood outside a recruiting office, shoes worn thin, eyes fixed on the flag rippling above the door. His name was Audie Leon Murphy. Inside, the sergeant looked him over and laughed. "Kid, you belong in high school, not a foxhole." Audie's jaw tightened. "I don't have a high school." He didn't. The Great Depression had stolen that. He'd spent his childhood picking cotton, hunting rabbits with a single bullet, feeding a dozen hungry siblings after his father disappeared. War was an adventure to him. It was an escape. He tried the Marines next. Rejected. The Navy. Rejected. Underweight, they said, too small for combat. Every rejection chipped at his pride, but not his resolve. He studied the posters of smiling soldiers and thought, I can do that. I have to. When his older sister Corinne learned he planned to lie about his age, she begged him to stop. "You'll die over there, Audie." He just said, "Then at least I'll die for something." She forged the papers anyway. At 17, weighing barely 112 pounds, Audie Murphy entered the U.S. Army. The doctor marked his chart fit for service, probably out of pity. None of them knew this kid would become the embodiment of American courage, and the most haunted hero it ever produced. Training camp in Fort Meade was humiliation in uniform. Recruits towered over him, calling him short-stacked Tex Mosquito. When he fainted on the rifle range from heat and hunger, one corporal sneered, "You won't last a week overseas." But Murphy learned fast. He cleaned rifles until the metal shone, memorized every drill, every field manual line by line. At night, he ran laps after curfew, whispering, "They won't send me home." There was something unsettling about his determination. Quiet, almost obsessive. Fellow trainees noticed he never bragged, never joked. He just worked, as if survival itself was a skill to be mastered. Then came Sicily, 1943, his first combat posting. He stepped onto the ship's deck, the Mediterranean wind in his face, terrified and thrilled. "You ready, kid?" a sergeant asked. Murphy nodded, though his stomach twisted. "Ready as I'll ever be." On the transport over, he wrote in his journal, "If courage is just fear that's learned to wait its turn, I guess I'll wait mine." The Allied landings were chaos. Mortars, smoke, men screaming names into the noise. Audie fired his rifle blindly at first, too scared to aim. Then he saw a friend fall. Something inside him switched off. The shaking stopped. The aim steadied. The boy disappeared, and the soldier emerged. When the shooting ended, he sat in the dirt, staring at his hands. They trembled not from fear, but from realization. He had survived. The others hadn't. That night he couldn't sleep. The faces stayed. But so did the hunger, not for food now, but for control. Every battle after that would be his way of making sure he never felt helpless again. Back home, no one knew. Letters from his sister arrived, filled with small-town gossip and prayers. She told him, "You're our pride now." He folded the paper carefully, tucked it in his breast pocket, and whispered, "Then I can't fail." Each month, new ribbons appeared on his uniform. Bronze Star, Purple Heart. He didn't talk about them. He didn't even keep count. Commanders began noticing that the smallest man in the company never froze, never missed, never asked for rest. What they didn't see was what happened after the shooting stopped. Audie sitting alone, staring at the horizon until dawn. There's a paradox every historian notes. The most lethal soldiers rarely look dangerous. Audie Murphy still looked like a kid who should have been delivering newspapers. Yet men twice his size followed him instinctively. Maybe it was his steadiness, or the strange calm that replaced fear in him. One corporal said later, it wasn't bravery. It was something colder, like he'd made peace with dying. Was that the secret? That he'd already accepted death before the bullets flew? By the time his unit moved north toward Italy, Audie's legend had begun. Small rumors in campfires and mess halls. That Texas kid doesn't miss. He's bulletproof. He hated hearing it. Every story felt like a lie built on the bodies of friends. During one patrol, he found a stray puppy shaking in the rubble. He named it Laddie and carried it everywhere, even under fire. His captain scolded him. "That dog will get you killed." Audie smiled faintly. "Maybe he'll keep me human." That line, years later, would echo through interviews, but no one understood what he meant. As winter approached and the unit prepared for the next campaign, the men around him started to change. Fewer jokes, more ghosts behind the eyes. But the kid from Texas kept moving forward. He had lied his way into war to find purpose. Now, surrounded by death, he'd found something else. Identity. And war, as it always does, was about to demand payment for it. Fade to black. The narrator's voice softens. He lied to get in, but soon the world would wish he hadn't. The men of Company B landed in Sicily under a sky split by tracer fire. It was July 1943. The air smelled of oil and cordite. The sea behind them glowed with burning ships. Audie Murphy, still barely 18, crouched behind a stone wall clutching his rifle, so hard his knuckles turned white. His sergeant shouted, "Move up, kid." He did, because hesitation was death. At first, he couldn't even look at the bodies. Every time a shell hit, he flinched like a child. But war is an education no classroom offers. Within weeks, the flinch disappeared. He learned to read the sound of bullets, to tell distance by the pitch, to feel time stretch before impact. Fear didn't vanish. It calcified into focus. One morning, his unit stumbled upon a German machine gun nest hidden in an olive grove. The sergeant froze. The crossfire pinned them. Murphy crawled forward alone, slipping between trees, his breath shallow. He pulled the pin from a grenade, whispered a prayer, and threw. The explosion tore through the grove. Silence. Then one more burst of gunfire, his rifle answering theirs until nothing moved. When his men caught up, the nest was gone. So were 5 Germans. No cheer, no handshake, just the smell of smoke and a boy staring at his hands again. That was his first kill. He never spoke of it, but that night he vomited behind a truck, trembling until dawn. "You get used to it," the sergeant told him. He never did. Sicily bled into Italy. Mountains, mud, malaria. Every inch forward cost lives. Murphy saw friends disappear mid-sentence, saw medics die dragging stretchers. He stopped counting days and started counting survivors. By autumn, he had become the company's best marksman. A quiet rumor spread. The kid from Texas didn't miss. But the truth was darker. He fired more because he felt less. Each trigger pull was both survival and confession. During one patrol near the Volturno River, they walked into an ambush. The first burst dropped 2 men. The rest dove for cover. Murphy crawled through the mud to reach the wounded. Bullets whipped past. He dragged one man by the webbing of his pack until they both collapsed behind a rock. "Why'd you come back for me?" the soldier gasped. Murphy answered without thinking, "Because you would have done the same." But he knew, deep down, not everyone would. The officers took notice. They gave him stripes, responsibilities, maps. Leadership came naturally, not from ego, but from something colder, obligation. Every order he gave carried weight, measured in lives. He hated it, but he obeyed. The other men followed because he never asked them to do what he wouldn't do first. In December 1943, he was wounded by shrapnel. When offered morphine, he refused. Save it for someone worse. He limped back to the line 3 days later. Command called it courage. Psychologists today might call it guilt-driven compulsion. Between battles, letters arrived from home. His sister writing about ration lines and the younger kids in school. Her words were sunlight he couldn't touch. He kept them folded in a tin box under his bunk, reading them before every mission like prayer cards. The Italian campaign dragged on. Monte Cassino Anzio, rivers of mud and blood. Murphy's unit was nearly wiped out twice. He stopped attending funerals. There wasn't time. What amazed survivors wasn't his aim, but his endurance. No sleep, no food, yet always alert. One corporal said, "He's made of wire and willpower." Still, the cracks showed. He woke screaming some nights, thinking rats were crawling over him. He stopped smiling. A doctor suggested rest. He refused again. "If I rest, I think." By the time his company reached southern France in 1944, Murphy was a veteran at 19, eyes older than his years, shoulders hunched like an old man's. He had learned the cruel math of war. Initiative equals survival. Mercy equals risk. During the advance near Ramachel, his platoon was pinned down by a German machine gun hidden on a terrace. The captain shouted for someone to flank it. Murphy volunteered. He moved like a shadow through the vines, crawled within 30 feet, and stood up firing. 10 seconds later the position was silent. When his men reached him, he was reloading calmly, his face streaked with dirt. One of them said, "You're crazy." Murphy replied, "No, just tired." He received the Distinguished Service Cross for that action, the second highest award for valor. But medals felt meaningless. They couldn't bring back the faces that haunted him each night. Back at camp, he sat alone cleaning his rifle, staring at his reflection in the barrel. How could someone so small carry so much death? In his journal he wrote, "The body hardens faster than the soul. The soul stays soft, and that's what hurts." That single line captures a paradox historians still study, how Murphy balanced compassion and ruthlessness, innocence and fury. Everywhere he went, he tried to keep something alive inside him. The dog he'd rescued, the habit of writing, the stubborn refusal to hate his enemies. When a captured German begged for water, Murphy gave it to him. The others looked away, confused. Later, a friend asked, "Why help the bastard?" Murphy said quietly, "Because someday I'll need someone to do the same for me." The war had begun to consume everything, not just lives, but meaning. What made sense anymore? How could mercy exist beside slaughter? Those questions never left him, and they would come back to destroy him long after bullets stopped flying. For now, though, Europe was still burning, and Murphy's legend was about to ignite with it. The screen fades to black. The narrator's voice tightens to a whisper. He killed so others could live, but what if that was a wound that never healed? January 26, 1945, Haute-Suire, France. The landscape was a frozen graveyard of trees, the sky low and gray. Company B had been fighting for days, holding the forest against wave after wave of German armor. Their commander's face was white with exhaustion when he finally said the words nobody wanted to hear. "Pull back. We can't hold it." But Audie Murphy didn't move. He looked at the field ahead, the snow scarred by tank tracks, the forest edge crawling with enemy infantry, and then at the dozen men still alive behind him. "If we pull back," he said quietly, "they'll slaughter us before we get to the ridge." Minutes later, artillery shells began to fall. The men ran. Murphy stayed. A tank destroyer beside him took a direct hit and burst into flame. diesel fuel spilled across the snow, turning it black. He stared at it, chest heaving, his mind strangely calm. He climbed onto the burning hull, grabbed the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on top, and pulled the trigger. The gun bucked against his shoulder like a living thing. The Germans didn't expect it. One man, alone, firing from a pyre of metal, but his rounds tore through their ranks. The first line fell. The second hesitated. The third scattered for cover. Smoke swallowed him. The heat blistered his face. He kept firing. A lieutenant radioed from the tree-line. "Murphy, pull back! You're gonna die out there." He shouted back over the roar. "Just hold the line." For nearly an hour, he held them. 200 German soldiers, 6 tanks, 1 man. He fired until his ammunition belt melted in the flames. Then he called an artillery on his own position. "Bring it closer," he said. Closer. Witnesses said he looked possessed, his small frame silhouetted against fire, the machine gun glowing red in his hands. When the gun finally jammed, he picked up a carbine and kept shooting. At one point, a German squad flanked to within 30 yards. Murphy grabbed a field phone and called again. "Drop it right here. That's an order." The shells landed so close that debris rained down on his helmet. When the last tank retreated and the snow settled into a suffocating quiet, he climbed down from the wreck. Smoke clung to his skin. The ground around him was littered with shell casings and bodies. He limped toward his men, who stared in disbelief. "Let's go get those bastards," he said hoarsely, as if the battle hadn't already ended. When medics tried to take him back for treatment, he refused. "I'm fine," he said, though blood darkened his sleeve. That day earned him the Medal of Honor, but awards meant nothing in that frozen silence. Later, a reporter would ask him, "What were you thinking up there?" Murphy paused. "I guess I just got mad." Mad, not at the enemy, but at the senselessness, at the waste, at the endless machine that kept asking boys to die. For his men, the story became legend, but for Murphy it became a cage. After the battle, the army sent him away for rest. He couldn't rest. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't stop hearing the gunfire. He once told a friend, "It's never quiet anymore, even when it's quiet." He was 20. Psychologists later studied men like him, soldiers who seemed fearless in combat but crumbled afterward. They called it the paradox of valor. Adrenaline burns through fear, leaving nothing behind but emptiness. In letters home, his sister wrote, "We're so proud of you." He never answered that one. When the war finally ended, Murphy had racked up 33 combat awards and decorations, including every major American medal for valor, and some from France and Belgium. He'd killed more than 240 enemy soldiers, survived countless ambushes, and been wounded 3 times. But medals don't heal memory. His friend said he carried himself differently after WWII. Quiet, distant, eyes that seemed to look past everything. When asked why he'd taken such impossible risks, he said, "Because someone had to." Historians call it courage. Soldiers call it duty. Psychologists call it trauma. Maybe it was all 3. The truth is, Murphy didn't want to be a hero. He just couldn't stand seeing anyone else die. He once told an interviewer years later, "It's not bravery. You're just too scared to run." The press romanticized him, the boy hero of Texas. Hollywood came calling. America needed faces for its victory stories. But the man behind the medals wasn't a poster. He was a haunted survivor who still flinched at car backfires. And deep down, he knew it. Every story about him was polishing a wound that would never close. As he left Europe, the ships crowded with cheering men, Murphy stood at the rail alone, staring at the waves. The ocean was calm. For the first time in years, there was no gunfire. And yet, in his head, the war never stopped. Camera pans upward from the burning tank wreck to the gray sky. He survived what no one should. But the battlefield never let him go. The war ended. But for Audie Murphy, the silence that followed was louder than any battlefield. May 1945. He stepped off the troop ship onto American soil, lean, pale, and 20 years old. The press swarmed him like he was a movie star. "America's most decorated soldier," the headline screamed. He smiled politely for the cameras, but inside he felt nothing. He was given parades, interviews, medals pinned in endless ceremonies. Senators shook his hand. Mothers hugged him. But when the flashbulbs faded, Murphy went home to a small apartment in Texas and sat in the dark. The quiet scared him more than gunfire ever had. He'd fought for 3 years straight. Now, every time a car backfired, he hit the floor. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, waking from nightmares where smoke filled a room and voices screamed his name. The Army called it combat fatigue. They said rest would fix it, but rest was a problem. By 1946, he'd been offered a new kind of battlefield, Hollywood. Actor James Cagney read about him in Life magazine and invited him to Los Angeles. "Kid, you got the face of a fighter," Cagney said. "Ever thought about movies?" Murphy hesitated. "I'm not an actor." Cagney grinned. "Neither are half the people in Hollywood." It sounded easy, fame, money, a new start. But acting wasn't therapy. It was exposure. Every camera flash felt like a gun muzzle. Every battle scene was a trip back to France. His first roles were small westerns, war films. He was shy on set, always apologizing, always watchful. The directors loved his eyes, soft but haunted, the eyes of a man who had seen too much. In 1955, Universal Pictures asked him to play himself in the film adaptation of his autobiography, To Hell and Back. Murphy refused at first. "I can't go through that again," he told them. But the studio insisted. America needs its hero. So he stood once more in a uniform, reenacting the moments that had destroyed him. The explosions, the screaming, the burning tank, all rebuilt on a Hollywood backlit under artificial light. When the cameras rolled, the crew watched as he froze mid-scene, trembling. "Cut!" the director shouted. Murphy blinked, disoriented, as if he'd just come back from another world. He finished the film anyway. It became Universal's highest-grossing picture for 20 years. The public cheered. Critics called it a triumph of realism. But Murphy couldn't watch it. "It's not a movie," he said. "It's my nightmares edited together." Fame became another kind of combat. Reporters wanted sound bites, not honesty. When he spoke about fear or trauma, they edited it out. America wanted its war heroes clean, noble, smiling, uncomplicated. At parties, producers toasted him as the boy who beat the Nazis. He smiled back, but his hands shook. He drank too much, gambled too often, slept too little. One night, a friend asked him, "What are you running from?" Murphy stared at his drink and said, "The noise, it's still there." He wasn't exaggerating. He'd begun hearing things, echoes of engines, phantom gunfire. Doctors prescribed sleeping pills. Soon he couldn't sleep without them. Hollywood had turned him into a symbol, but symbols aren't allowed to be human. Directors wanted his scars, but not his truth. Studios wanted his medals, but not his nightmares. When he married actress Pamela Archer, she became his anchor, but she saw the cracks. "He never stopped being a soldier," she said later. Even when he smiled, part of him was still out there. He never found peace among civilians. When a film crew once staged a mock firefight, Murphy walked off set shaking. "You can't fake that sound," he said. "You can't fake what it does to you." The other veterans understood. Many wrote him letters. "Thank you for saying what we can't." Murphy began quietly lobbying for mental health support for soldiers. At a time when PTSD had no name, he risked his career speaking openly about it. "There are thousands of men like me," he told a reporter. "They just don't talk about it because they're afraid they'll sound weak." America wasn't ready to listen. The newspapers ignored it. Sponsors told him to stick to war stories. So he turned the pain inward. He spent nights pacing, gun in hand, convinced someone was breaking in. He once confessed to a friend, "The war didn't end for me. It just changed its shape." By the early 1960s, the charm of fame had faded. His films earned less. Studios moved on to younger faces. But Murphy didn't care. He wasn't chasing glory anymore. He was trying to stay alive. He raised horses, invested in a failing farm, and gambled to fill the void. Money came and went, The flash of the camera that once made him famous now made him flinch. One afternoon, a fan approached him and said, "Mr. Murphy, you're my hero." He smiled politely, then whispered under his breath, "No, I just survived." That was the part America never understood. That survival isn't victory. By now, he was in his 30s but looked 10 years older. The nightmares never stopped. His doctor increased the dosage. The pills dulled the edges, but also his will. Still, Murphy refused pity. He once told a journalist, "If you want to honor soldiers, don't call us heroes. Call us lucky, because most of us never came home." That quote never made it to print. It didn't fit the post-war dream. By 1970, the man who had once stood atop a burning tank destroyer lived quietly, away from spotlights, raising horses and writing poetry. Few knew that each poem was a coded message about his trauma, loneliness disguised as verse. He remained devoted to men he'd lost, visiting military hospitals, sitting beside wounded veterans who couldn't sleep. "You're not crazy," he told one. "You're just remembering too loud." That line, "remembering too loud," became his unspoken diagnosis, his definition of PTSD before the term existed. Camera cuts between black and white war reels and Hollywood studio lights. The narration softens. He won every battle, except the one no one saw. The world had crowned him a hero, but inside he was still the boy from Texas, small, scared, and trying to make the noise stop. And soon, that silence he'd chased his whole life would find him the most tragic way possible. By the late 1960s, the lights of Hollywood had dimmed for Audie Murphy. The studios that once called him America's Golden Soldier now sent smaller scripts, smaller checks. Fame had shifted to a new generation, and the nation that once needed his legend had moved on to new wars and new heroes. He lived quietly on a ranch outside Dallas, long fences, wide fields, and silence that could never quite stay silent. Some nights he sat on the porch staring at the horizon, cigarette ember glowing, pistol resting on the table beside him. "I'd just like to know it's there," he told his wife when she asked. But she knew what he meant. It was the only thing that made him feel safe from his own memories. Friends said he carried two versions of himself: the public Murphy, charming, polite, humble, and the private one, still fighting battles no one could see. He woke drenched in sweat, shouting orders into the dark. Sometimes he'd walk the fields until dawn, whispering the names of men who died 30 years earlier. He wrote poetry about them. One verse read, "Sleep, soldier, sleep, the noise has passed you by. I guard the night, though I do not know why." That line captured everything: duty without rest, survival without peace. By day, he raised horses. By night, he gambled, trying to outrun debt and memory alike. When money ran out, he pawned medals, then bought them back later when a film royalty came in. Reporters never saw that part. America still wanted its hero polished. In 1968, another war filled the television screens, Vietnam. Young soldiers returned broken, haunted, rejected. Murphy recognized the look in their eyes. It was his own reflection. He began speaking quietly at veterans' hospitals, refusing press coverage. "They need to know it's not weakness," he told a friend. "It's just the echo." He spent his last years fighting for those men, lobbying Congress to study what he called combat stress. He testified that the government owed veterans help for the wounds that don't bleed. Few listened at the time, but his words would echo decades later when PTSD finally entered the medical vocabulary. Despite everything, he never lost that boyish gentleness. He would stop to sign autographs for children, always asking their names first. But behind the smile, there was exhaustion. In one interview, he said softly, "I guess the war never ended. It just comes home with you." In 1971, he boarded a small plane bound for Georgia on a business trip to discuss a new film deal, one he hoped would pull him out of debt. The weather turned bad over Virginia. The aircraft disappeared into fog and never arrived. Days later, search teams found the wreckage scattered across a hillside. Everyone aboard had died instantly. Audie Murphy was 46. News headlines called it the final mission of America's greatest hero. Crowds gathered again, cameras, flags, salutes. the pageantry of remembrance. But this time, he wasn't there to flinch from the flashbulbs. They buried him in Arlington National Cemetery, Section 46. The smallest headstone in the row, fittingly modest, marked only with his name, rank, and a list of decorations too long for the stone. Visitors still come, leaving medals, notes, sometimes a small slice of apple pie, the soldier's symbol of home. His widow, Pamela, stood quietly at the funeral, sunglasses hiding tears. A reporter asked her what people should remember about him. She said that he was kind. That's all he ever wanted to be, kind. The Army gave him 21 guns of farewell. But perhaps the truest salute came from an old sergeant who whispered, "He never left us. He just went on patrol." Over the years, historians have debated what made Murphy extraordinary. Was it courage, discipline, luck? Or was it something simpler? A man too stubborn to let fear dictate the outcome? Whatever it was, it came at a cost few could bear. When psychologists later studied his life, they called him a case study in unresolved trauma. Fellow. Soldiers called him brother. But maybe the best title is the one he earned quietly, without ceremony, witness. Because through him, we witness the truth that war's greatest casualties aren't always those who fall, but those who return carrying ghosts no one else can see. The same boy who once lied his way into the Army to escape poverty had ended up defining heroism, not as fearlessness, but as persistence. He once said, "Bravery is just determination to do a job that must be done." Simple words. But behind them was a lifetime of noise, loss, and a fight to keep believing life was still worth living. Today, when soldiers come home from battlefields across the world, his story still shadows theirs. The decorations shine, the eyes remain tired. And somewhere, in that tension between glory and grief, lies the real measure of service. Soft piano begins. The screen shows black and white photos fading into color. A boy in uniform, a burning tank, a Hollywood set, a quiet grave. The narrator's voice drops to a near whisper. History remembers his courage. Few remember his pain. But maybe, by remembering both, we honor them all. Audie Murphy won every medal, but lost the peace he fought for. His story isn't about glory. It's about what it costs to carry it. If the story moves you, the next will leave you speechless. When a lone Japanese soldier kept fighting for 30 years after the war ended. Subscribe and keep walking the forgotten roads of history.